Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're tackling a massive, fundamental debate in political science. We're looking at liberal democratic theory versus elitist democracy theory. Essentially, we're asking who really holds the power. It's a fascinating clash between our high-minded democratic ideals and, well, the empirical reality on the ground.
It all really boils down to a single, honestly kind of uncomfortable question. Do you truly rule, or do you just choose your rulers? We all grow up believing that democracy means rule by the people, right? A system where the masses are actively steering the ship of state. But is that actually what happens in practice? To figure this out, we're going to examine two entirely contrasting philosophical frameworks. One paints this beautiful picture of active, empowered citizens, while the other suggests, well, we might just be passive bystanders in a game controlled by elites.
So, to understand the optimistic side of this whole debate, we first need to define liberalism. Emerging way back during the Age of Enlightenment, liberalism was this radical challenge to absolute monarchies and the divine right of kings. It's built on the absolute core assumption that human beings are inherently rational and inherently equal. It completely champions individual liberty, autonomy, and maybe most importantly, limited government. The big idea here was to create a society that actually protects individuals from the arbitrary exercise of authority, creating a framework where freedom can just flourish.
Let's move to and see how this builds when you take those liberal ideals and actually apply them to government. You get a system built on a few core principles. First up, government by consent, meaning authority actually flows from the people. Next, public accountability, ensuring leaders actually have to answer to us, the citizens. Then we have majority rule, but, and this is a big but, it's balanced crucially by the recognition of minority rights to prevent majority tyranny. And finally, constitutional government, which places strict legal constraints on leaders through a separation of powers and an independent judiciary. Theoretically, this whole structure perfectly empowers the masses.
This classical liberal view is perhaps best summarized by a famous quote often attributed to Thomas Jefferson. That state governs the least is the one which governs the best. Liberals traditionally support what's called a minimal or a night watchman state. Think of it like this. They view the state as a necessary evil. It literally has to exist to maintain law and order and protect civil liberties, for sure. But its power should be strictly confined so it doesn't step on your individual pursuit of happiness and personal interests.
It's a beautiful, super empowering vision, isn't it? But here is where we have to pivot and ask a really tough question. Is true self-rule actually a myth? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, several thinkers started to really look at how democracies were actually operating in the real world, and guess what? They didn't see empowered masses. They saw a reality that sharply contradicted that optimistic liberal ideal we just talked about. This empirical, slightly cynical reality check gave birth to our second framework.
Enter the elitist theory of democracy. Now, this theory completely flips the liberal script. It posits that regardless of the form of government, whether you're looking at a democracy, a dictatorship, or a monarchy, political power literally always lies with a small section of society, the elites. Developed explicitly as a critique of egalitarian ideas like socialism and classical democracy, elitist scholars basically argue that the majority of human beings are incapable of self-government, and that the chosen best, or just a privileged few, are the ones who inevitably govern the rest of us.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the slightly cynical argument captured by Italian sociologist Vilfredo Pareto, who famously declared, "History is a graveyard of aristocracies." He strongly believed that political power never truly belongs to the masses. Instead, history is just this continuous cycle, a circulation of elites. One dominant elite group falls, only to be replaced by a brand new elite group. The masses don't rise up and take power, they just kind of watch the changing of the guard at the top.
Classical elite theory was really shaped by Pareto and his contemporary Gaetano Mosca. They're the foundational figures of the Italian school of elitism. Mosca argued that society basically always splits into two, a ruling minority and a ruled majority. The ruling class performs all the political functions and completely monopolizes power just because of their organizational skills. Pareto added this fascinating psychological twist. He said elites are either cunning foxes who manipulate the masses, or they're forceful lions who dominate through coercion. Either way, it's an elite minority calling all the shots.
Then we have Robert Michels, who formulated the incredibly pessimistic iron law of oligarchy. Michels actually studied organizations that were specifically committed to democratic ideals, like the German Social Democratic Party. And what he found was absolutely crucial. He found that all complex organizations, no matter how democratically claimed to be, inevitably develop bureaucracies. And those bureaucracies inevitably concentrate power into the hands of a few leaders. So even the most idealistic, power to the people organization eventually just turns into an exclusive club run by a select few at the top.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in how these two theories actually view you, the citizen. On the left, liberal theory views you as an active participant. Citizens are seen as highly involved in decision-making, rational, and fully engaged in public life. But on the right, elitist theory views citizens as entirely passive spectators. To elitists, the masses are often just apathetic bystanders whose only real political role is occasionally stepping up to choose exactly which set of elites gets to rule over them next.
We see a really similar stark contrast when we look at the actual location of power. Liberal theory insists that power is dispersed widely among the people and is constantly kept in check by constitutional balances and independent institutions. But elitist theory, it argues that power is tightly concentrated. As sociologist C. White Mills described it in the American context, there is a power elite, this cohesive group at the very top of the military, corporate, and political hierarchies that basically dictates policy, largely immune from any actual electoral pressure.
So we clearly have a massive clash here between an empowering ideal and a pretty cynical reality. But is there a middle ground? Well, yes, and it's called procedural democracy, or democratic elitism. This is a modern, empirical synthesis largely developed by the thinker Joseph Schumpeter. He basically argued that classical democracy was simply asking way too much of the average citizen. Instead, he defined democracy simply as an institutional arrangement for arriving at political decisions, where individuals, meaning the elites, acquire the power to decide by means of a competitive struggle for the people's vote.
Joseph Schumpeter's theory really acts as this procedural meeting point between the two extremes. He actually accepts the elitist reality. Power is indeed concentrated in the hands of a few, and the masses do not truly govern. However, he maintains a really crucial liberal requirement. These elites absolutely must be chosen through fair, transparent, and periodic elections. So in this view, democracy isn't some source of profound human empowerment. It's honestly simply a practical, procedural mechanism to ensure stability and allow for peaceful transitions of power between competing elite groups.
So, the crucial point is that modern democracy operates very much like a supermarket. Seriously, this is the economic theory of democracy, popularized by Anthony Downs. In this brilliant analogy, the politicians are the entrepreneurs selling policies, and the voters? We're the consumers. We essentially go shopping and we buy policies with our votes. We choose the political party or elite faction that provides us with the maximum personal utility. It's a highly transactional view of self-rule.
To bring it all together, we've traced this incredible journey from traditional humanist aspirations straight to modern empirical realities. Under the traditional liberal view, power is widely dispersed among the masses, citizens are superactive decision-makers, and the whole purpose of democracy is humanist aspiration and empowerment. But under the modern elitist view championed by Schumpeter, power sits tightly with